Mini episode 1434 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge Mini episode 1434. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris here with one of our longtime FDH Lounge dignitaries and good friend from the Queen's Chronicle, my good buddy Lloyd Carroll, coming on to talk about year one of the Biden administration. Lloyd was on a segment that we did right about the time that the administration started. He was on a segment, a very good one that we did with author William Cohen, the three of us talking about that and everything that was to come. But, Lloyd, just to kind of get it started here a little bit, I was thinking to myself, the last year has given somebody, I believe, also from Queens. Isn't Billy Joel from Queens?
He's from nearby.
Okay, all right. I think he's got enough material, I think, to write a sequel to We Didn't Start the Fire. You know, inflation, Afghanistan, Omicron, violent crime, southern border, Senate stalemate, Putin's taking Ukraine.
Very good, Rick. I may have to pitch that one to Billy. I'll give him your phone number.
Thank you. Thank you. So, it's one of these things where if we don't laugh, we're going to cry, right? I mean, things are not good right now, but just the sheer magnitude of everything that is going sideways right now is something where, not to be prisoner of the moment, Lloyd, but you don't see that too many times in this country to have so many things going so dire.
You know, Rick, I'll agree and disagree, but I'm going to show my age here. I think things were worse in 1979, that last year of the Carter administration. It seemed like with the Iranians holding our guys hostage, inflation was out of control. It just seemed like that was the worst time I can remember. You know, interest rates were like 14%. I wish I could have locked in my CDs for that. I mean, compact disc, but certificates of deposit. Well, I should have taken like for 40 years at 14%. Back then, that was, wait a minute, it's going to go up to 20% next week. Yeah. So I think that was actually a worse time.
Well, and here's the thing. I'm glad you brought that up, Lloyd, because for all of the thing a year ago and it's been a thing where, and again, while I don't agree with much of what happened during his presidency, Jimmy Carter, I will admit, I think has been a pretty admirable post-president, although I think some of his foreign meddling from time to time when he's undermined administrations, maybe he's not been so great. But it's so funny that he's become so revered for the post-presidency that the Bidens a year ago felt comfortable going down to Plains and Joe Biden be like, hey, remember, I endorsed Jimmy Carter in 76. Well, these are comparisons a year later that are not looking so good because Joe Biden, if we think back, he started his political career in the U.S. Senate when Richard Nixon was still president. Nixon, then Ford, then Carter. The through line of their presidencies, there wasn't many things that connected them, but the through line was inflation. The brutal inflation that peaked in the late 70s, but it started off being bad under Nixon and it was bad under Ford. Remember the whip inflation now?
Buttons
of 76? Yeah, so it's a thing where Joe Biden, this is one of the things here, and for as much as people carped about the neoliberalism of Clinton and Obama when they were president, Biden, following this pull to the left, it's a thing where he will find himself with his political career being bracketed by the inflation of those days and the worst inflation ever since, which is the inflation of right now.
Sure. Now, the one thing I do believe that Biden can point to is, and even though people aren't going to buy that, is the fact we were in this pandemic for so long, nobody was spending any money.
Yep.
And now suddenly, hey, we can make an argument. We're optimistic. The future's so bright, we got to wear shade. Hey, we're going to spend. Now, hey, we've saved all this money. We're tired of staying in the house. We're denying ourselves. We want to travel. We want to do X, Y, and Z. We want to get that stuff. And there is, that supply chain lag. We knew this was going to happen eventually. So, again, I'm not trying to be an apologist for Biden, but try to at least give the devil's kind of the devil's attitude here, devil's advocate, just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt as far as that goes. But you're right. He's gonna have to do something. We can't have gas prices going to $4 a gallon. People aren't going to want to hear that.
Yeah, and there is something I'm going to bring up here, and this is going to be very convenient because I'm going to pat myself on the back for an observation I made that has turned out to be true. And somebody that I was hoping could join us for our discussion tonight here, he wasn't able to, but I hope to get him on at some point soon here. A good friend of the show, Colin Delaney, the proprietor of ePolitics.com. Colin being a left of center guy, so he and I always have some fun discussions here. And I countered him, I think this was late in the 2020 campaign, when he was talking about, Biden's always been a moderate, Biden's always been really more of a centrist. And I said, no, wrong. Joe Biden has always been somebody who has followed the magnetic pole, the center of gravity of the Democratic Party. He came up post-60s sort of fear. It was the age of Nixon when he first got elected. So how do I become a Democrat in the age of Nixon and later the age of Reagan? So, tough on crime and this and that and whatever. Joe Biden was where he thought he needed to be at any given point in time. And that's the thing where the center of gravity in the 2010s, as the younger part of the Democratic Party grew disillusioned with Obama, felt that they'd been sold a pig in a poke. And you know what? I think they kind of were, because Obama was running as a change candidate against Hillary Clinton. And again, he was a neoliberal in the end, much like Bill Clinton. Post-Obama, the restlessness here, Bernie Sanders in both cycles. Bernie Sanders was the candidate that captured the hearts and minds in the Democratic Party, and the opposition to him was splintered. And Joe Biden likes to say, I'm not Bernie Sanders. He just said it again the other day. I'm not Bernie Sanders. I'm a mainstream guy, whatever. But he is following the pull of AOC and everybody else on there. He's doing what he's always done. It looks like he's veered to the left suddenly in the last year or two, and he has, but he's being consistent with the Joe Biden that's always been there, which is, like I said, being sucked to wherever the center of gravity in the party is.
Well, I'm glad you said the center of gravity in the party. Now, I'm not a Democrat, so I'm going to say the center of gravity for the general electorate, though, is not as far from the center of gravity in the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And it's funny when I think about progressives. Now, I got to say, it's funny, you're in Ohio, so this is the exception to the rule. The only progressive that I can ever name that is won in a purple/red era statewide is your senator from the great state of Ohio. So, Sherrod Brown. He's the only one I could ever name that is a progressive who has won in a competitive area.
Yeah.
Statewide. When you talk about progressives like AOC, she could only win in the bluest of districts. Crayola wishes they come with a crayon as blue as AOC's district.
Right. And that's the thing. And that the entire party is not there, the rank and file. And that's the thing, that Biden was able to get elected, or more to the point, nominated, when he was nominated by the Democratic Party, because, again, the establishment pulled together. And again, the interesting thing is here, when you look at the disparate interest groups of the party, basically the black vote is certainly a little bit more conservative, or at least moderate, than some of the far-out woke white people. And that's what helped Joe Biden in South Carolina. Jim Clyburn kind of pulled him over the finish line by saying Joe Biden's a mainstream guy, Joe Biden's going to fight for us, as opposed to any of the woke issues and everything like that. I mean, Clyburn wasn't running as anti-woke, but you know what I mean. It was the whole thing of, he's going to be, a blue-collar candidate, a bread-and-butter issues kind of a guy. And that was how Biden got the nomination. But to me, and I almost think the before and after period of the Biden administration came about 6 months before the election, because I think so much of the calculations went out the window with the George Floyd stuff. Because you can trace it back. It's the before and after. Amy Klobuchar might be vice president today, if not for that. She's much more in line with what Biden wanted to do, I think, as far as a candidate there. She took herself out of the running because she knew at that point, as a white lady, much less somebody who'd been a prosecutor in Minnesota, it wasn't going to fly. But Biden, and I tell you, it looked like a smart calculation at the time, because the major institutions in this country, the corporations and everything like that, everybody is immediately apologizing for every offense that they'd ever committed, imagined or otherwise. And it looked like that's where the country was, but there was a backlash coming. And Biden's on the wrong side of that backlash, and that's what's fueling a lot of this stuff right now. I think inflation and pocketbook issues are more to blame for where he's at than anything else. Afghanistan started it, the incompetence of the way the pullout went from Afghanistan, but a big part of this, I talk to friends, Lloyd, that are not even that political, and friends that I think I always thought at least were more moderate than I was. And they're like fire-breathing anti-woke people now. There is a majority coming together in this country that's been radicalized by this stuff in the last 2 years, Lloyd.
Well, we saw in the 2020 with congressional races.
Yes.
That told you all you needed to know. And this was a story that was you could see it coming, but nobody wanted to report it. Certainly in the mainstream media. I can't say I watch Fox to know this, but certainly the mainstream media, the liberal media, that nobody wanted to report, well, there could be a backlash for George Floyd that's going to wind up helping the Republicans. But that's exactly what happened. So I remember watching MSNBC, and again, I like to watch MSNBC, not because I'm a flaming liberal, but I like to watch the extremes. I find it somewhat laughable, and I'll watch Tucker Carlson for the same reason on the right, because I like to just see, how things are on the margins. Well, MSNBC tries to pretend they're mainstream, but they're really super left. They only report stories that they want. But I remember watching Ali Velshi, who was a very good reporter. I spoke with Ali. But he had the misfortune of being in Minneapolis, and I think it was Carlson actually pointed this out, where there was a building on fire from, I guess, another night of rioting. And Velshi's going, it was a peaceful night here in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of thing that just did in the Democrats to the point where you watch people coming on MSNBC defending looting. I mean, not just,
right.
These are things, and things can be replaced. I mean, you talk about just not reading the room or overreach. Maybe that's the word.
Right.
And that the two things can be true at the same time. You can hate Derek Chauvin and what happened to George Floyd and still say, wait a minute, this doesn't give license to burn. And I think Biden actually, to his credit, walked that tightrope. The problem is no one of the Democrats did.
Well, and it's very interesting, too, because going back to that point, and again, I watch some MSNBC and CNN. I'd rather watch stuff that I blatantly disagree with than I don't watch anything Fox News because it's all a caricature of what people like me think. As somebody with a brain, I'm not going to sit here and watch bumper sticker, mouth breather type crap that's supposed to represent people like me. That doesn't represent people like me. I have a brain. I don't, speak in just this bumper sticker jargon like they do. So I watch those channels as well. CNN. This was like for weeks in June of 2020. I used to refer to it as the pregame show for Riot Night in America. They would have these panels on. Yeah, they'd have these panels on before the nighttime protests. And listen, and I understand that. I understand that a lot. I'm willing to make that distinction. A lot of people were peacefully protesting. But the media whitewashed the degree to which there was anarchy and violence. Downtown Cleveland, I'm here to tell you, was completely torn up one of these nights. It was that weekend when the whole country kind of got hit. I think it was Memorial Day
every
weekend.
City, New York, Philadelphia, they all got it. So,
and badly.
They tried to keep it under wraps the best they could.
Right. They suppressed it, and everybody knew they suppressed it. And that was a thing where it just, that fed into the backlash. And again, and this is a thing of where, again, I'm just so jaded. I don't really spend much of my time online or even offline just complaining about things just because I'd go out of my mind if I was just complaining about things every day. But like I said, I'm hearing this from friends that I either consider to be apolitical or that I figured deep down were really kind of moderate. And these people are all sounding like Attila the Hun these days on the whole thing of wokeness, political correctness, the thing of our Cleveland Indians changing their name. I mean, that pisses me off, but, again, it pisses off a lot of people. It's symbolic of this larger kind of a thing, this shift in our country, and that's the whole thing, is that this shift, and it predated it. I feel like a lot of this kind of stuff, a lot of the wokeness and everything like that, I think kind of goes back to the Obama years, and I remember, this was early in the Obama years, there was a sitcom that I really enjoyed called Outsourced. And and it was about a call center in India that an American guy went over.
I do remember that show. Was that Fox? I think I do remember that.
It was NBC, and Lloyd,
NBC, yes. Okay.
I loved it. It was funny.
You were correct.
It was not making the Indians the butt of the joke. It was a thing of where it was sort of an equal opportunity thing as far as who had made, but the American guy was the butt of the joke, really more so than anything else. I remember the thing went off the air after a season largely because it wasn't the climate for it, and it was like, I remember thinking, that was in the last year or two that you could have even conceived of making a show like that. There's that cultural shift that's happened in the last 10 to 12 years, and that's the thing, Lloyd, right now. I think the backlash goes further back because it's a thing of where the culture has lurched leftward and sort of left the people behind. People feel in large part like this is all, even if they agree with some of it, that it's moved way too fast for where they're at.
Well, I'll actually go the other way on you. I'm not disagreeing with what you said, but I think the real problem in political correctness came probably with Harvey Weinstein. The Me Too movement, to me, set it into on steroids in terms of political correctness, and probably ruined the Democratic Party in the process. Not just because a lot of the villains were Democrats from Harvey Weinstein to the latest like Cuomo and Al Franken when they started devouring their own. That's not even what I'm getting at. What I think the problem was, Republicans were smart. They understood to appeal to men, we're going to let boys be boys.
Right.
That you couldn't be, to the point where men were startling, you couldn't compliment a woman on her appearance because, and there was just that over. It's always going to be a little flirtation between men and women. That's the way it's been from the day the earth was formed, from Adam and Eve. So, yes, there's a difference between being a creep, but also some good-natured cocktail party flirtatious banter. I mean, whether it be the rap, but that was, and you talk about a rebellion. I think that's also one of the reasons that men love Trump. That he could be crazy, but the fact that he was so politically incorrect that he could have his fun with the Playboy models, there was a certain rat pack aura to him that men can be men, boys can be boys, and the Democrats became the party of emasculated men. And I've said this to my liberal friends. They haven't totally fought me on this issue. That is the funny part, to the point where that Tara Reid tried to say that Joe Biden was doing so. Believe it or not, that may have been what finally ended Me Too for the Democrats. That may have been the best thing that ever happened to them. Yeah. I haven't heard much since then.
Well, you're right about that.
Andrew Cuomo stuff.
Oh, it's been, outside of Cuomo, you're right. It's been quieter, I think. I can't think of too many other major scandals with politicians or even other major non-elected Democrats like Hollywood types or whatever. I can't remember too much else that's happened since then.
It's kind of run its course, I think, again, overreach.
Well,
that is...
Again, I will say, I'm glad there was accountability for the people that were legitimately creeps and stuff like that. When you get into Harvey Weinstein and that kind of stuff, I mean...
We're not defending Harvey Weinstein. I do have to say that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I think we're both in agreement on this, is that this took down a lot of people who deserve to be taken down. But you're right. These things always take on a life of their own, and where it veers from where it went initially... sometimes it'll go in directions, and again, and we're more or less talking about this as analysts right now, as opposed to whether we agree with it or not. As analysts,
we're looking at almost like we're the old days of the cheerleading grade, just putting the odds, trying to figure out what's going on here, who's going to win, who's going to lose. That's all.
We're calling balls. We're calling balls and strikes, because I definitely have some friends that would be wagging a finger at me if they thought that I was putting the bad mouth on men having to be accountable for that kind of crap, and I'm not. But the whole Me Too culture, yes, I think that has redounded negatively on the Democrats, and it's a thing where, again, everything that is being done right now, and this is a thing where, again, you can't fault Biden for, at every opportunity here, trying to bring up Trump and whatever. And by the way, and he is right about that Trump being out there does make it harder for any Republicans to collaborate on any kind of legislation. And I've been a guy going back to the Obama years saying, as somebody who was almost uniformly opposed to Obama's legislation, but like, hey, if there's a chance to water it down a little bit and do a little less damage to the country, why wouldn't you want to do that? But then you don't look as pure, you're bona fides, in a primary don't look as good, whatever. And I don't consider that makes me moderate. I know you define as moderate. I define myself as pretty hardcore. But to me, if you can water down some of the damage being done, but the Republicans by and large aren't doing that because of Trump, but it's a thing where everything that is happening to Biden right now is, it is in the wake of everything with Trump, with the pandemic running completely out of control his last year in office, the January 6th stuff, and his role in inciting it, this entire alternate reality of where the last election was rigged, which, again, in every election, you got some shenanigans around the margins, whatever. But nobody has shown any kind of credible evidence here. And this is where you're left with talk about ghost satellites from Italy and the ghost of Hugo Chavez controlling it from Venezuela and the great beyond, of all this kind of crazy, crazy stuff, the anti-vaxxer stuff that has infiltrated even mainstream Republican politics at this point. In spite of all of this, Biden is coming apart at the seams, 33% in the polls. So focusing it back on Trump, that's all he's got. But that may be enough, not in 2022, but in 2024 if he draws Trump again.
Well, he's not altogether wrong on these points. The vaccination thing, to me, is just something we should be out of this pandemic a lot better.
Yes.
Like only 62% of Americans are vaccinated. Can you imagine if this were Jonas Salk, make polio great again, if there's social media around and Fox News and all these other crazy networks? I mean, this is follow the science. That's what Republicans used to do. Follow the facts, follow the science, be patriotic. I mean, whatever happened to the days of Everett Dirksen, LBJ, Ronald Reagan, and Tip O'Neill? That's when this country was great. That, okay, maybe we're not happy with the president, but at least deals get done. That's what makes America great. We're a country of businessmen. We're a country of deal making, and now we've become a zero-sum game. If my side's in, we want it. We don't care about you, and vice versa. And that's not patriotic. That's not good for this country.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that you can advocate for your political party, for your ideological side, whatever it's going to be, without it being that kind of a straitjacket. And the funny thing is that, and again, this is one of these things where this is more than a little bit convenient, I think, for Joe Scarborough, because he doesn't want to admit that he's gone left to whatever degree, but he likes to act like he's still conservative, and it's Trump. He likes to call Trump a New York moderate liberal or a moderate Democrat. The funny thing is, in some ways, Lloyd, and for as much as I know you think of Trump as being a right-wing lunatic, as somebody who kind of is, he's not. I can tell you he's not, because I am one. Because here's the thing: he was a big.
I never said Trump was a right-wing lunatic.
Well, I'm just guessing that you might say that based on what your position is. But a lot of people think that he is. But here's the thing, though: everything today is culture war. If you're looking at a culture war, I'm a policy guy, dude. I've always been a policy guy, and that's the whole thing here. Trump was a big spender. Yes, he was conservative on abortion and with the judges and everything like that. I'll give you that. But the areas in which Donald Trump was demonstrably very much to the right are few and far between. But everything is viewed now through the prism of the culture war, and if you're owning the libs 24/7, then you're a right-wing lunatic. Which is an insult to right-wing lunatics who actually care about policy and who actually, so it's one of those things where, Scarborough's got it partially right as far as what Donald Trump is, because Donald Trump has not deviated from being the moderate New York Democrat that he was all these years. He's changed in some ways, but in a lot less ways than most people think he has, substantively.
Well, I think one of Trump's problems, not even Donald Trump, I think his cabinet came off like Batman villains.
Yeah.
Really, that had a lot to do with the perception of Trump as opposed to how Trump really felt.
Right.
Plus, one thing I know about Trump, being a Queens guy that he is, I've watched him, I've spoken with him many times. He loves an appreciative audience.
Right.
And liberals weren't being that appreciative audience where conservatives were. So, that's just his trading and entertainment. You go where the marketplace was. So
yes.
I'm not as anti-Donald Trump. I mean, I disagree with some things on his presidency, but you're not going to see me here as this knee-jerk Trump hater. I'm more disgusted with the Republican Party not trying to say, okay, he had his 4-year run. Yeah, we get it. The reason he carries on about the election, not because he knows it was. I really think in his heart he knows it wasn't stolen.
Right.
It's that losing is bad for the Trump brand. If you watch The Apprentice, it was all about winning. There was no room for second place in The Apprentice. That was the Trump image that he's selling. I get that. And so I don't even take it. I'm afraid, but others aren't in on the joke. And this is why we're still having all these crazy voter suppression, That's not going to help the Republican Party in the long run. It's funny. Yeah, we may like Trump because he was a strong guy, and there is a market for strong men in this country. I certainly can see that. But it's hurting. Americans deep down like democracy. We like competition. We like fair umpires. That's why we love our sports. But if we're not going to have that, that's bad for our political system.
Well, and here's the thing, too, is that, again, both sides are definitely playing politics on the issue with the vote and everything like that. Republicans, I've been saying this all along, you want to have the high moral ground, you focus just about 100% of your efforts on you must show ID at the polls. And by the way, if you're going to do it in good faith, you make it easier for people who don't have driver's licenses to get that, because that's something I've learned. Is
That's
that,
fine. Exactly right, Rick. I have never been an anti-ID person. Look, you can't get on an airplane without showing an ID.
Yes.
You can't buy your liquor. So even if you look like you're 100 years old, you still have to show an ID.
Right.
I get all that.
Right.
But you're right. At least let's play fair here and then say, okay, you need to get an ID where we're going to open up more offices so you can get it, so there are no excuses.
Yes, exactly.
Like the way we've done vaccines in this country. One thing I will give Biden that he's not gotten the credit for, maybe it's been forgotten, a year ago, you had to spend hours online to try to get a vaccination appointment. I mean, people are going crazy.
Yes.
Now we're actually paying people to take the vaccine. Please come, we're here for you.
Exactly.
So that's a success story that has not been reported. And unfortunately, because you have this perverse and one thing I'll say, Biden's right on this one, anti-patriotic vaccine movement, to President Trump's credit, he said, with Bill O'Reilly, who I actually miss very much at Fox, not only did I get the 2 shots, I got the booster. He did it, and yet this is still a controversial issue.
Well, also, too, and he's trying to play holier now on that, he ducked the issue himself for a long time. He didn't want to talk about it. He was afraid of pissing off his supporters. And now, at this point, and here's the funny thing, it may backfire on him, because Ron DeSantis is suddenly trying to use that as a wedge between Trump and his base, because DeSantis is basically running around going, I'm crazier than Trump is, vote for me. So we'll have to see how that whole schism plays out.
It's an act, though. The problem is Trump is authentic. One thing, when Trump acts crazy, whether he is or not, people are more likely to believe it.
Yeah.
When I went to Harvard and Yale, and I was a top-notch Navy guy,
right,
you get the feeling it's pandering. I sense that it's not going to pass the authenticity test.
I don't think it's going to either. And again, and this is where Biden, next time around, would be very fortunate, more fortunate in his choice of Trump than DeSantis, but even DeSantis it would be a lot more vulnerable in a national election than a lot of his cheerleaders would have you believe. But this is a whole thing here, too, is that, again, you point out during the 2020 elections with Congress and everything like that, foreshadowing what happened in 2021 with Glenn Youngkin winning the Virginia governorship and the Republicans almost capturing the New Jersey State House out of nowhere, that this movement was sort of taking effect. The backlash to Biden was almost starting to come together before Biden was even in office, because here's the whole thing. The lesson that I learned from the 2020 elections was, because down ballot, and I think a lot of folks were assuming that Trump was going to lose. Basically, Trump's message, the best parts of Trump's message, and there are some things I find salutary in parts of it as somebody who has been a Buchanan guy in the past and everything like that. America first, whatever. The parts of the message that are not as, poisonous, the ones that are better on policy, in my estimation, that message works. And that's a message, and that's part of the glue of this anti-woke thing that I'm talking about again here, that this is a thing where, you had the New Deal coalition in this country that lasted up until we talk about Jimmy Carter again, Joe Biden's choice for president in 1976. Jimmy Carter presided over the very, very end of the New Deal coalition after a couple of decades. And this is a thing where Biden, I'm almost wondering in the eyes of history, if he is not presiding over the future, here, the anti-woke coalition, something that could be to the Republicans what the New Deal coalition was to the Democrats. That's worth keeping an eye on.
Well, that's something that Biden, as a pragmatist, will pick up. And don't forget, you still have guys like James Carville in that party and David Plouffe and some of the other pundits who I do see on MSNBC who would agree with everything you said here, because the name of the game is winning elections. Republicans learned the hard way in 2010.
Yeah.
Winning primaries with your crazy candidate and then not winning a general election is as good as winning the Grapefruit League or the Cactus League championship. It means nothing when it really counts.
Yeah. And by the way, you mentioned 2010, and there was something I said on the show that I think probably sounded crazy that year. But I think history has borne me out on this, and I actually think the last year really has done so. And that being in 2010, when John Boehner won the Speaker's gavel, I was sitting there going, you know what I really wanted? I really wanted Nancy Pelosi to come back with a 1 or 2 seat margin, because they won't get anything done, and she won't be able to blame it on anybody. Because I remembered the way that Clinton got reelected running against the Republican Congress. Sure enough, Obama had his beautiful target in mind here. It was the Republican Congress, and he replicated what Clinton did in '96. And I'm looking at this now, for as much as I was in despair at the Georgia Senate results at the beginning of the year here, and the way that Trump absolutely tanked that election for the Republicans by sowing all this doubt in the election integrity and everything like that. In the end, again, Biden got through and spent a lot of money and whatever, and I think greatly contributed to this inflation deal. So in the short term, I think it was bad for the country. But I think longer term, much worse for Joe Biden, much worse for the Democrats, because they're trying to point fingers at the Republicans right now. And yes, the Republicans are hanging together and filibustering everything in Senate, but the average person doesn't understand that. The average person just looks at it and says, you have majorities in both houses and you can't deliver. And they can talk about Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema all day long, and that is not going to penetrate to the average voter. They are stuck having this quote-unquote majority of 51-50 that's not a majority at all, because it's not an ideological one, especially with Manchin. Sinema is more liberal, but Manchin especially is not temperamentally or otherwise very liberal. So this is a thing where I think it's almost be careful what you ask for, because Biden wouldn't have wanted to have Mitch McConnell as his chaperone, I think, as Senate Majority Leader, but this is the poisoned chalice of expectations. You have Pelosi and Schumer, who the public thinks should be able to get your agenda through for you, and now you're hitting roadblocks all over the place.
Well, I think it's one of the Democrats' biggest problems, and not, believe it or not, Biden's unpopularity. I think Chuck Schumer is a guy who goes under the radar as a problem for Democrats. I mean, he's my senator here in New York, but he comes off very weak, to use a Yiddish term, very schnooky about him. It's just, if I were the Democrats, I'd say, get me John Tester. That's who you need. A macho guy.
Right.
And yet, if I were to say, I would be, my lefty liberal friends would be laughing at me. You can't have John Tester. Well, that's what you need. You need that kind of, maybe that Marlboro man for the Democratic Party. This is the response to the whole Me Too stuff.
Yeah.
That's a problem for them. I think it's funny. I think Pelosi gets vilified needlessly in a lot of ways. For a woman who's like in her 80s, she looks pretty good. She's sharp. She's no wimp. Yet, I think Schumer flies under the radar screen. I never quite understood that from both Republicans and Democrats.
I agree. And I think part of it is the whole San Fran Nan thing. That she's a little bit easier to pigeonhole as far as being more radical than she actually is than Schumer, who was really a Wall Street Democrat the whole time. So you're right about that. But I want to go back to, we talked about before and after. During one of the defining moments, again, during the campaign, the George Floyd thing, because I think that pushed Biden substantially left. The before and after moment of the presidency, because when we're sitting here talking about things being a disaster for Biden and being 33% in, I think it was the Quinnipiac poll, the before and after point was Afghanistan. And I have to say, and again, as an America First guy and everything like that, I have to eat some humble pie on this, because I was in favor of a full pullout from Afghanistan. And I have to sit here and kind of question on this, because again, the Biden administration didn't handle it well, but it's one of these things of like, wouldn't any kind of pullout have necessarily led to that? I'm unconvinced that there was a way to do it substantially better than what it ended up being, which was a national humiliation on par with the fall of Saigon, and something where, again, they ran on the whole thing of like, this is the best and the brightest coming back. This is the restoration of competence post-Trump. This is the people here, we're the men in the gray flannel suits. We're going to get it done. Well, and also, some, women with purple hair and everything like that, right? Because it's Democrats, you got to be diverse. But you know what I'm saying. I mean, they ran on competence. Maybe it's boring, but it's competence. And that they were seen the way they wanted to be seen the first 6 or 7 months. And the before and after point is Afghanistan, which they've never recovered from, which is remarkable to me because you talked about it before with Jimmy Carter. The hostage crisis is the only thing I can think of in the last several decades when there's been a major foreign policy fiasco. Okay, and Bush with the Iraq War, too. But that was a more obvious one. I mean, it's a war that went bad. Of course he's going to tank in the polls. But it's very rare when we don't have a lot of skin in the game in this country for something like that to be such a sharp turning point in there. We didn't have a lot of troops that were still in Afghanistan, but it was the national humiliation. At the end of the day, as you said, the Marlboro man. We don't like to see ourselves as the pitiful, helpless giant as we were described in the 70s. And that's where, again, Biden has not recovered from this, and you have to wonder through the rest of his presidency if he's going to be able to. I mean, in 2023, obviously he's going to be running sharply against the Republican Congress that's going to be investigating him on every front and stonewalling everything that he tries to get passed. But I mean, we may have seen the most effective part of the Biden administration in its first 6 or 7 months. Most administrations at least get a year and a half.
Well, yeah, as far as Afghanistan goes, Biden's biggest mistake was obsessing over September 11th, the 20th anniversary.
Yes.
That was he could have easily just quietly did what he did, get the guys home, maybe a few. I remember the old Vietnam days where we're going to have de-escalation. We'll bring home, 5,000 a month. And you know what? Then the Taliban will take the country over. But at least we got our guys out safely. We were able to get some of our people who helped us out. That was the biggest mistake. I don't know who in that White House didn't see that. Well, wait a minute. Maybe we don't have to live and die with September 11th. Let's slowly, quietly, and you know what? You gave it signal to the Taliban. They're a very patient group. We just want to get our people out. We'll get your pains in the necks out of here. By the spring, it'll all be yours. Enjoy. I'm surprised that didn't happen.
That's true. That's an excellent point, that the timetable of that.
That was one mistake, and that set off negative momentum. There's no two ways about it. I think that Biden has been, believe it or not, too much pussyfooting on the non-vaxxers. I know that this country, we're to freedom and this and that, but the fact is, if we want to get our economy going, we want to live our lives, be able to go to a press box, be able to go to an indoor basketball or hockey game without really sitting and worrying or having our masks on, get vaccinated. That's been proven, and yet he's afraid of, like you mentioned about the New Jersey governor's race. Nobody will ever see a vaccine card in that state again because of what happened, that close the race. And that is one of the worst things that could happen to us as a country as a whole. It
is. And it's a thing where, again, as much as it, and again, I'm somebody that, again, on paper, you would expect to vote Republican in just about every election. Although, again, I voted third party in the last couple of ones here. I took great fun in 2020. It was a fun way to stick it to the Hillary people also when I would describe my Joe Jorgensen vote as I'm with her. And that was always a lot of fun to enrage.
That's very good, the Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen.
Yes. And things would be a lot different in this country if we had Joe and Spike in office, I'll tell you that. But this is one of these things where, again, I will be glad next year to see that Pelosi's not going to be Speaker anymore, but Schumer's not going to be Majority Leader anymore. But it's not like I'm actively sitting here rooting for Republicans, even while I'll be pleased at the outcome, because, as you said, and we're both intellectually honest here. We try always, all of us, to be on this show. The Republicans, again, for pushing the anti-vaxxer, anti-mask stuff, the lies about the last election, The lies about January 6th, which was violent and was all of these things like that. The fact that, again, Trump screwed the pooch and basically tried to sweep COVID under the rug most of his last year in office. Yes, he did push the vaccine thing, which he belatedly takes credit for. I give him credit for his role in the expediting of the vaccines, but everything else he did was shameless, making the masks a culture war, acting like you're a puss if you wear a mask, all of this kind of stuff. He has massive blood on his hands. A lot of these folks have blood on their hands. DeSantis on down the line, and the Republicans are going to benefit despite all of this. It's incredible.
Run, yes, but you just mentioned something. What are they going to do in 2023? Open up impeachment against Biden.
Yep.
If I were Biden, I'd say bring it on. This is the best that you guys can do for me.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because
this is how, and they don't even care if they win or lose. I think this is all, whatever it would make Rupert Murdoch and Fox happy for ratings, almost Trump's winning elections. That's how sad it's become. And maybe the same thing for MSNBC, too. They'd much rather see their guys being pure than actually win elections.
Well, and I will say, as somebody who is a big fan and enthusiast of the HBO show Succession, truth is actually stranger than reality. The political world they conjure up on that show still can't hold a candle to what the actual 2020 election was and everything that we've got going on here subsequently. And that's the thing here, too, is that, again, people looked at this, I think, with Biden as, he's going to come in, he's going to restore competence, there were a lot of folks, like yourself, a lot of moderate Republicans and everything like that. I may not agree with him on all of these issues here, but he'll come in, he'll get things back going in the right direction. And again, and this is one of these things where I know the Lincoln Project people and everybody else didn't want to believe that Biden was going to go ideologically left. Like I said, if you looked at his history, Joe Biden has never been a man, I'll say it again, who's gone against where the center of gravity in the party was. This was all predictable. Everything that he was saying during the campaign, even to Democrats of like, well, I want to be a figure who's known for boosting the next generation of Democrats, whatever. All of those are substantially to the left of him. I mean, he was saying all these things. He was pandering to the left flank at every point here. And so a lot of this has been predictable.
I'm going to defend him, Rick, on one thing. One thing I do want to defend Biden on in terms of the pandering issue. And you say this. Let's think about what happened with Hillary versus Trump.
Yes.
What was one of the leading storylines after the election was over? How the left, the Bernie people stayed home, some voted for Trump. That was the difference. And you have the Jill Stein stuff. You think about all that. That may have been the reason that Biden didn't want to have that storyline be the story of 2020, that the Bernie people stayed home, that the young people stayed home. They were not inspired by old Joe. They cast a vote for whoever the new Jill Stein was going to be as a protest. He didn't want these Susan Sarandon storylines.
Okay.
That's something I do want to say in his defense in terms of electoral strategy.
Okay, but here's the thing, though, is that if you look at cycles in this country, what happened in 2016, especially with Jill Stein, was very comparable to 2000 with Ralph Nader. And that's the thing where when Democrats aren't afraid of anything like that, no Democrat thought that Trump was going to win the election. So that was a thing there, too. They could appear to be blasé. In 2000, I think a lot of them probably didn't believe George W. Bush was going to win. The ones that weren't as fired up about Al Gore probably thought, oh, there's not a dime's worth of difference anyways. Well, you see what happened. By 2004, Bush hung on just because this country so rarely turns out a wartime president. But by 2008, everything had really crusted. And there was no way.
Well, the financial crisis, that was probably that.
That was the last
John
blow.
McCain had no luck.
Well, that was the last blow. But Iraq had metastasized. For Bush, his Afghanistan moment, ironic that we call it that, right? Because Bush is the one that got us into Afghanistan. But his equivalent of Biden's Afghanistan moment as a before and after, I think, was Katrina. Because Bush's presidency truly ended with Katrina in late 2005. And he was a lame duck for about 2.5 years after that. And that's a thing where, so it's all where it's at in a life cycle. When a George W. Bush presidency was theoretical to the Democrats, they could be like, oh, what does it matter if we vote for Nader? By 2004 and especially 2008, they weren't going to lie down again. After 4 years of Donald Trump, Joe Biden didn't have to fear that his base was not going to be out there to vote for anybody other than Donald Trump. So that's where I'm going to push back on you, Lloyd, because Donald Trump was not theoretical in 2020. We lived through 4 years of him.
It's a fair point, but you know what? You'd be surprised how many people still don't vote. It's funny, we're all the time about voting rights and this and that. Too many people still don't vote, no matter how dire, no matter how no matter how much they have on the line to vote. It's still almost shocking. That's all I can say. And maybe that's why Biden was doing what he did. But your point is well taken.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of going in this direction. We had a very interesting, again, our friend Colin Delaney from ePolitics.com, where I was going back and forth with him on the show, and I accused him of splitting hairs on this, and I still think I'm right about this, because I said, here he is saying that he's not Bernie Sanders, he's a mainstream guy. This was back during the latter part of the campaign. I said, and he's saying in the next breath, I'm not a socialist, but I'm running on the most progressive platform the Democratic Party's ever had. I said,
I love semantics.
yes. And I said, tell me where he's not contradicting himself in that. Well, you can have Rick, you can have the most progressive platform in the Democratic Party without it being socialist. I'm like, dude, you're really splitting hairs here. You're really splitting hairs.
You're 100% right, Rick, but let's be honest. Certain words set people off are more pejorative than others.
Sure.
So you say the word socialist, unless you're Bernie Sanders. Even people who are so left will try every which way to avoid saying the S word. But progressive sounds nice. Almost, it sounds like the car insurance company. I mean, it sounds benign. That's the problem. I think we're splitting hairs, but certain words trigger better than others. That's all I can say.
Exactly, but that's where I felt it was intellectually dishonest for Biden to try and act like, oh, don't try and paint me as this far left guy. Oh, but I got the most progressive platform ever, because that's a mixed message at best. And, so these signs were there all along, Lloyd. This is what I expected out of Biden directionally out of this administration. I won't say he hasn't disappointed. I'm disappointed, but I'm not disappointed in the sense of I didn't expect it.
Well, fair enough. Like you said, it's year one. Some successes. I mean, I think we're doing better with COVID. I think that it seems like the unemployment rate is pretty low. Hopefully, the shelves are going to seem to be stocked better. Now the question is going to be, can we get contractors? Do we start to wait 6 months for furniture? That's going to be the key that we're going to be looking at for 2022 for them.
Yes, and the whole thing, too, of, again, and this is one of these things where it sounds like the boogeyman that people talk about, because for so long it was just theoretical. For 40 to 50 years, whenever you would talk about inflation in this country, and that's been a subject where, I've been expecting it since the downfall, the financial crash of 2008, when they started doing the helicopter Ben Bernanke thing.
It's inevitable that it was going to make a comeback.
Yes.
Hey, Rick, let me ask you this in terms of issues that, again, people thought were off the table.
Yeah.
2016. And now the abortion issue. We used to always think, Roe v. Wade, whatever talk came to the Supreme Court, now that was just from your grandparents' generation. That is settled law. Even in 2016, the Hillary people tried to use that as a way to motivate the vote. And it kind of went over like a lead balloon. Turned out in that case, she was probably right. It was not that settled. And Trump got 3 justices on. Again, we're not looking the way we want to root one way or the other for it. But do you think that because that's not settled law anymore, that the Democrats may try to pull that one out as a major campaign issue?
Here's the thing, and I'm predicting this pessimistically, because, again, I'm a lifelong Roman Catholic. I'm a Midwest Roman Catholic, hence I'm a pro-life guy. But I'm one of these guys where I'm a hippie about the unborn, but I will say
you
this.
Use that term, I remember. I'm more pro-choice, but that's okay. Certainly respect where you're going with it.
Yeah, like the way that some people are about baby seals and stuff like that. That's kind of how I describe myself. But it's a thing where, I look at it pessimistically. I think it's going to be not decisive, but I think it's going to be a minor loser for the Republicans, because here's the funny thing, is that both sides are going to be putting more onto this than the substance would demand. And here's what I mean by that, because the Democrats are going to be disproportionately outraged. The Republicans are going to be disproportionately jubilant. The fact of the matter is, abortion will never go away in essentially the blue states, and abortion has already been pretty hard to get in most of the red states. So it's a thing of it's going to go back to the states. Lloyd, it's been a soft repeal of Roe v. Wade, I think, over the decades anyways. with this. I mean, you're seeing the Republicans really push it in Texas and places. And by the way, too, I mean, I have a couple friends in Texas who are screaming mad about, that law there. And I got to admit, I think it was pretty stupidly written, the way that you can criminalize it towards women directly and everything like that. That's stupid.
Yeah, you can report who's driving somebody to a claim. I mean, it wasn't just, the doctor performing the abortion. It was anybody who drove someone, anybody who, it was a little ludicrous.
Right, and it's a thing where you can be a pro-life guy, but you can also, and this is a phrase that I've heard, I think that this was a phrase that I'd heard about some of the flag-burning laws in the 1990s, putting a kick me sign on the law. And that's kind of what it was in Texas, is the way that they went about it. Again, it was politically stupid. It was just, but again, the Republicans are pushing to a full-out repeal. But again, it's not like abortion, I think, was super easy to get in Texas before this. Abortion will always be plentiful on demand. There will be abortion clinics, 5 of them on every street corner in California from now until eternity, because it's pretty much a sacrament out there, and in New York and other places like that. So it will change the lay of the land less than most people think it will, Lloyd. I'm not saying it won't change, but it won't change as much as the public thinks it will. And that's where, again, I think it's going to be not a huge winner for the Democrats, because I think there's more pro-life people than there used to be. But yes, this for some of the people that count themselves as pro-life but are going to be worried, that it's going to change things, for the worse in their minds. Yes, I do expect it to move the needle somewhat for the Democrats, at least this time around, and maybe in 2024.
Yeah, okay, I was curious. By the way, where you are in Ohio, has that been a major issue? Because it's, it's a reddish state, but it doesn't hit me it's not Texas. That's why I was kind of curious how.
It's not, but it's the fact that the state has gotten to be more and more, I think, pro-life, solidly so, over a period of time. Now, I mean, again, I'm in the bluest corner of it here in the Cleveland area, outside of, ironically, where I went to school, Athens in southeast Ohio, but that's not a big blue area. But outside of the blue areas, I think the population flight from the Rust Belt has been more pronounced than downstate. The Appalachian-type areas, I don't think, have been hit by population flight as much as we've still been up here. So I think that's part of what has kind of driven this whole thing of the state getting redder, is that I think you've had more people from Northeast Ohio going out of state than in the other parts of the state. So I think it's sort of been that as we've gone along here. But I mean, Ohio used to be sort of the bellwether of the nation, and it's really not anymore because, again, you look at the last election here, Trump won Ohio pretty solidly, but again, did not carry the national vote. And again, we'll have to see what happens. But my whole thing here, just to bring everything full circle, is, and I'm going to say this now, for everything that I've said about the burgeoning anti-woke movement in this country, and something that, again, however reluctant I might be as somebody who's never been an enthusiast of Donald Trump, in 2016, because I didn't think he would appoint the kind of judges I would want, I thought he was a phony and everything like that. And in some ways, up until the pandemic, he was a better president than I thought he was going to be. He was restrained on foreign policy. He was not militaristic like the George W. Bush administration, starting stupid wars and stuff like that. It was COVID that made me decide I couldn't vote for him and I needed to go third party again, because I felt like he had blood on his hands, just letting people die, doing the mask shaming and everything like that. But it's a thing. I'll give him credit for his role in helping to bring together this anti-woke coalition in this country. But the thing is, even a lot of his fans see it. He has outlived his usefulness. And Joe Biden needs him, or perhaps to a lesser extent, Ron DeSantis, to be the guy to run against him in 2024. Because if you have a fresh face on the Republican side with the energy of this burgeoning anti-woke coalition behind him, Biden is going to get drilled.
Probably so.
And so I guess we both agree on that, even from your more moderate position and my more hardcore position on this. I have to just say here, just to direct this towards you, for any of the kinder things that you've had to say about Biden over a period of time, and I realize you're just being fair here, but rumor has it that one of the things you like about Joe Biden is he's always been nicer to people who write for weekly newspapers than other politicians. Is that true?
That is absolutely true, and he does root for the Philadelphia sports team, so I do have to give him that. For what it's worth, I've never met him, so I can't say what he's like in person. I met Donald Trump, ironically, 3 different times, and I have to say, he's very charismatic, very personable, and I always appreciated the fact that I wrote for the Queens Chronicle because he's a Queens guy. So
yes.
He would tap me on the shoulder and go, "What's new in Queens?" I got a kick out of it.
Probably still reads your columns to this day.
I am not a Donald Trump hater by any means.
Right.
There you go.
Right.
I just don't think President Trump was the right role for him. I mean, I think he's an entertainer. We got to get him a better role.
Exactly. And I'm just going to clarify this here, that I know that your issue with him, and I see you commenting about him a lot on social media over a period of time. I know that it's more so been that you have seen him taking the Republican Party further down a road you didn't want it to be on, that it was more on the substance of things and everything like that. So to the extent that you've been opposed to Trump, I know it's been in that way as far as him representing a trend that you don't like.
Well, exactly. And I'm tired of anybody who doesn't identify with every point-by-point, like Fox News, OAN, or Newsmax being a rhino.
Right.
That, you know what, on some issues, I think we need more of that in this country, both parties.
Right.
On some issues, I can be left. On some issues, I can be right. I think most people think that way, but we're not allowed to say it. There's no marketplace for that.
Yeah.
At least in cable television.
Well, on a show like this, we always want to try and have nuanced discussions because, again, like I said to you off air, nobody else is doing it. They've left the field to us. So we're going to do it. We're going to break it down. And like you also said prior to the show, just like how we do with sports stuff, which I got to tell you, we just passed our 15th anniversary with the show. It was a time for reflection. And Lloyd, in the initial days of the show, myself and my fellow co-creator of the show, Jason Jones, I mean, that was the mission statement. Like, we want to do a show that's about everything, but do it like with the analysis of post-game sports shows and everything like that. And a discussion like this just exemplifies that.
And nothing's off the table. I always love how you say that.
Yes. Nothing is off limits. Nothing is off topic on the FDH Lounge. And that is particularly true when we have our good, colorful friend Lloyd Carroll with us, longtime FDH Lounge dignitary. Don't miss him in the Queens Chronicle every week here. Lloyd, always a pleasure. Sorry it took a while between the last appearance and this one, and it'll be a much narrower time till we get you on again.
I look forward to that. Congratulations on 15 big ones, and look forward to many, many more with you, Rick.
Thanks, buddy. This is where we're just going to keep this thing going here and keep tackling all the topics of the world as we go along. Looking forward to doing that. Looking forward to doing that with you. Thank you, Lloyd, and thank you, everybody, for joining us here for mini episode 1434 of the FDH Lounge.